I woke up at 6 a.m., sweating heavily, my shirt sticking to my back like a wet towel. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No hum from the air conditioning, no buzz from the refrigerator. My daughter Emma, 8 years old, was already awake in her bed, kicking off her covers and complaining about the heat outside. The thermometer on my porch read 92 degrees, and it wasn't even 7 a.m. The weather forecast had been warning about a record-breaking heat wave all week, with temperatures expected to reach 105 degrees. I stumbled to the electrical panel, hoping it was just a tripped breaker, but everything appeared normal. My phone had full bars, so the cell towers were working fine. Calling the power company's automated line with growing dread, I punched in my account number. The cheerful recorded voice informed me that there were no reported outages in my area, and my account was up to date. That's when my stomach sank. If it wasn't a widespread outage and I had paid my bills, why was my power out? Hurriedly throwing on some clothes, I stepped outside into what felt like an oven. The heat hit me with force, as if I'd walked into a physical blow. Mrs. Henderson next door was watering her roses with her sprinkler system running smoothly. Across the street, the Johnsons still had their porch lights on from the night before. Everyone else seemed to have power, except me. I've been living in Willow Creek Estates for 3 years now, ever since my divorce. It's one of those planned communities where every house looks alike and the HOA rules are stricter than a phone book. The monthly fees are high, but I thought it was worth it for Emma to have a safe neighborhood with good schools. I've kept to myself, maintained my property, and followed the rules. Or so I thought. Lately, I've been receiving letters from the HOA about my electricity usage. Karen Mitchell, our HOA president, decided that the community needed to conserve energy during peak summer months. She sent out notices suggesting residents set their thermostats to 78 degrees or higher. I mostly ignored them. My electric bill is my concern and I always pay it on time. Karen Mitchell fits the stereotype of an HOA president perfectly. In her mid-50s, driving a white SUV covered in bumper stickers about property values. She treats the neighborhood like her personal domain, measuring grass heights with a ruler and issuing violation notices for minor infractions. She had already nitpicked about things like my garbage bins being visible an hour after pickup or Emma's sidewalk chalk drawings being too colorful. But the energy-saving campaign had taken a more serious turn recently. 2 weeks ago, Karen Mitchell showed up at my door with a clipboard and a forced smile. She told me my home was consuming far more electricity than recommended and urged me to be more considerate of the community's resources. I calmly told her that I paid my own electric bill and would manage my energy usage as I saw fit. Her smile turned cold, and she muttered something about selfish residents who disregard the common good. Now standing in a stifling house with the indoor temperature climbing past 95 degrees, I was beginning to connect the dots. Emma was flushed and irritable, saying she felt dizzy, classic signs of heat exhaustion, which can be serious for kids. I knew I had to get her somewhere cooler right away. I scooped her up and took her to Mrs. Henderson's house. She's a kind elderly woman who's been in the neighborhood since it was built. She let us in without hesitation, her air conditioning offering instant relief. As Emma sipped a glass of ice water, I explained what had happened. Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted to concern as I described losing power while the rest of the street still had it. "That's odd, dear," she said, topping off Emma's drink. "Did you speak to anyone from the HOA maintenance crew? They were working around here last night." My heart sank. "Working on what?" I asked. She wasn't sure but said she saw their truck near my meter around dinner time. And Karen Mitchell was with them, gesturing at various houses. I thanked her and called the power company again, this time insisting on speaking to a real person. After 20 frustrating minutes on hold, a representative finally came on. She double-checked. My account. Everything was current, no service disruptions, no maintenance logged. Then she mentioned something that made my hands tremble. "Sir, according to our records, your service was disconnected yesterday at 7:32 p.m. by a third-party contractor with proper authorization paperwork. It was requested by your community's management company." Stunned, I hung up and immediately called Karen Mitchell. She picked up on the second ring, her voice sugary sweet. "Oh, hello there," she said, practically smirking through the phone. "Having some power trouble today?" "Karen, did you have my electricity shut off?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Well, I did warn you about overconsumption during peak hours. The HOA is allowed to take emergency measures to protect the community's infrastructure. It's all covered in Section 12.4 of the HOA guidelines." I was speechless. "You shut off my power during a heat wave, with a child in the house?" Maybe now you will understand how serious this is, she said, her tone sending chills down my spine. Your energy usage was 30% above the neighborhood average last month. That's simply not acceptable. Karen, it's going to hit over 100 degrees today. My daughter could get heat stroke. Her reply was chilling. Maybe you should have thought of that before ignoring the conservation notices. Your power will be restored once you agree to limit your usage to community standards. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there stunned, phone still in hand, realizing that what she had done wasn't just outrageous, it was likely illegal. Shutting off someone's electricity without notice, putting a child at risk, abusing her position. It was a growing list of violations. I called 911 first. The dispatcher took the report seriously, especially when I mentioned a child and the extreme heat forecast. They said an officer would be dispatched within the hour. Then, I contacted Channel 7 News. Their consumer advocacy segment had been covering HOA controversies all summer. When I explained the situation, reporter Jessica Martinez jumped on it. Are you saying your HOA president cut off your electricity without warning during a heat emergency? She asked. Yes, I said. And I don't think I'm the only one she's done this to. By noon, Officer Rodriguez arrived. He was a younger cop, but he listened attentively, took detailed notes, and seemed genuinely alarmed by the health risks. While we were talking, Mrs. Henderson came over, visibly winded from the heat, but with something important to share. Officer, she said, I've been asking around. This isn't the first time Karen's done something like this. The Williams family down the road had their water cut off last month. Karen claimed it was due to excessive lawn watering, and the Patels had their cable disconnected because she said their satellite dish was an eyesore. Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. Do you have their contact info? Within the hour, Jessica Martinez showed up with her crew. Since my house was nearly 100 degrees inside, she filmed the interview in Mrs. Henderson's cool air-conditioned living room. During her on-air segment, she said, "This is a textbook example of power abuse. HOA boards don't have the authority to disconnect utilities without due process, and certainly not during a declared heat emergency. It could be a violation of state law." The piece aired on the 5 p.m. news with the headline, HOA President Cuts Power During Heat Emergency. Within minutes, my phone started blowing up with calls from neighbors I barely knew. One after another, they shared similar stories. Karen had overstepped with them too. The Patels confirmed she had convinced the cable company to cut their service over a supposed visual violation. The Williams family had been without water for 3 days over non-existent drought rules Karen claimed they violated. That evening, a local attorney named David Kim reached out to me. He specialized in HOA law and tenant rights and was clearly alarmed. Mr. Thompson, this isn't just a civil issue. What happened may be criminal, he said. Disconnecting someone's utilities without notice is illegal. Doing it during extreme heat with a child in the home? That's potential child endangerment. And if she's done it to others, we may be looking at systematic abuse and harassment. He offered to represent me pro bono if he could pursue a class action lawsuit against Karen and the HOA board. He immediately filed for an emergency injunction to get my power restored and sent formal legal notices to both Karen and the HOA management firm. The next morning, just after 8 a.m., there was a knock at my door. It was Officer Rodriguez back again. But this time, Officer Rodriguez wasn't alone. A woman in a crisp blazer stepped forward and introduced herself. Detective Sarah Park, Willow Creek PD. We have a warrant to search HOA records and question Karen Mitchell. She explained that the district attorney had reviewed my case overnight and determined there was probable cause for criminal charges. We take utility shutoffs very seriously, she said, especially when a child's safety is involved. This goes far beyond any legitimate HOA authority. We walked to Karen's house together. When she answered the door in her bathrobe, she looked stunned. The smug confidence from yesterday? Gone. Karen Mitchell? Detective Park said, flashing her badge. We have a warrant to access HOA maintenance records and all communications related to utility disconnections in this community. Karen's face turned pale. I don't understand. I was acting within my authority as HOA president. Then you'll need to provide documentation of that authority, Park said, along with all records of any disconnections you authorized. What they found in her home office was damning. There were email threads between Karen and a local maintenance company discussing problem residents who needed to be brought into line. A spreadsheet tracked neighbors' utility usage with notes like, too high, needs correction. Repeat offender, Consider escalation. Stubborn, apply pressure. Worst of all, an email from the HOA's own legal counsel dated 2 weeks before my power was cut, explicitly warning her that she had no authority to disconnect utilities and that doing so could lead to criminal charges. She had known. And she'd done it anyway. Detective Park stared at the email, then at Karen. Mrs. Mitchell, did you receive this message from your attorney? Karen's mask slipped. I was protecting the community's interests. These people were being selfish and wasteful. Ma'am, Park said firmly, you're going to need to come with us. Karen was arrested right there on her front porch, half the neighborhood watching from behind curtains and screen doors. Officer Rodriguez handcuffed her while Detective Park read her rights. Karen's protests about HOA authority, community standards, property values fell on deaf ears. You're under arrest for unlawful utility disconnection, child endangerment, harassment, and abuse of authority, Park said. You have the right to remain silent. Karen's expression cycled rapidly. Shock, rage, denial, panic. This is ridiculous. I'm the HOA president. I was protecting property values. This whole neighborhood will go downhill without me. Ma'am, Officer Rodriguez said calmly as they walked her to the cruiser. HOA presidents don't get to break the law. Cutting off utilities is illegal, no matter what your title is. The sight of Karen Mitchell being driven away in outage handcuffs sent shockwaves through Willow Creek Estates. This was the woman who had ruled over the neighborhood like a petty tyrant, harassing residents over mailbox heights, lawn colors, garden gnomes. For years, she'd wielded her power like a weapon. Now she was finally facing consequences. Neighbors stepped out onto their porches, some with quiet satisfaction, others visibly stunned. Whispers spread fast. Within 2 hours of her arrest, my electricity was restored. The utility company, likely eager to distance itself from liability, sent a crew out immediately and even offered a formal apology. The temperature in my kitchen dropped steadily, but more than that, for the first time in a long time, Willow Creek Estates felt like it could breathe again. Emma and I were finally able to cool off in our own home again. 3 days after Karen's arrest, Attorney Kim called with an update. The day is moving forward with all charges, he said. Child endangerment alone carries up to 2 years in prison. Add to that unlawful utility interference and harassment. We're looking at serious time. And the fines could exceed $50,000. But criminal charges were only the beginning of Karen Mitchell's unraveling. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove her as president. Her employer, a local real estate company, terminated her after the story made the evening news. And the State Real Estate Commission had opened an investigation into her license, citing the criminal charges as grounds for suspension or permanent revocation. Within a week, 5 more families joined the class action lawsuit Attorney Kim had filed. Each had their own story of intimidation, threats, or unauthorized penalties. The HOA's insurance company refused to cover Karen's actions, stating they were outside the bounds of any legitimate HOA authority. Karen Mitchell, once the self-appointed queen of Willow Creek Estates, was now staring down hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential legal judgments, attorney's fees, and personal liability. And then came the final blow. 2 weeks later, I sat quietly in the back row of the courtroom as Karen stood before the judge for sentencing. She had accepted a plea deal to avoid jail, but the consequences were still significant. 18 months of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, $25,000 in fines and restitution. Her hands trembled as the judge read the sentence aloud. Gone was the smug enforcer of community standards. Gone was the woman who had weaponized her HOA title to control and punish. Standing there in a drab suit, her shoulders slumped, Karen Mitchell looked like what she truly was, a middle-aged woman who had let a little power go way too far and now had to live with the cost of that mistake. When the gavel fell, she let out a stunned whisper, barely audible over the courtroom hush. $25,000, as if the reality of her downfall had just hit her for the first time. I walked out of that courtroom with a strange sense of peace. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice, really. It was about safety, about accountability, about knowing that in this neighborhood, finally, someone had stood up and said enough, and this time everyone had listened.